The crystal flutes clinked as Mark Wilson and his executive team toasted to another record quarter at Northwest Financial Advisors. I observed from my position near the doorway, dressed in a simple black dress that Mark had once called appropriate for the wife of a CEO, the same dress I'd worn to countless company functions where I was expected to smile and nod while the men discussed business. My phone silently recorded their increasingly loose conversations about upcoming acquisitions and market strategies. To crushing the competition, Mark announced, raising his glass of 18-year-old Macallan, the same scotch I'd arranged to be delivered to this private club through a distributor I quietly owned a significant stake in. When we acquire Pacific, Trust next month will control 40% of the regional wealth management market. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra. Special for you! I kept my expression pleasantly neutral as I circulated among the guests, playing the role I'd carefully cultivated over the past 10 months. The perfect, supportive corporate wife. Someone Mark and his cohorts would speak freely around, never. Suspecting that every boast, every strategy discussion, every casual mention of insider information was being methodically documented and cross-referenced. Speaking of crushing, David Cooper, their CFO and Mark's college buddy, chuckled loudly. "How's that little hobby of yours doing, Mark? The one your wife keeps pestering you about." Mark's laughter echoed across the private club's rooftop. "Oh, Rachel's sustainable whatever thing? Still trying to convince me to invest in reusable sandwich bags or bamboo toothbrushes or something." He gestured toward me with his tumbler. "Hey, sweetheart, how's your little eco project coming along? Still thinking you'll be the next Elon Musk?" I forced a mild blush and ducked my head, portraying the exact mixture of embarrassment and determination they expected. "Still growing, Mark. We've actually expanded our product line this quarter." More laughter erupted from the table. If they'd been more observant, they might have noticed that my simple dress was a custom Stella McCartney piece, that my modest jewelry was selected from a sustainable luxury designer whose company I had recently helped finance, or that the Feidi leather portfolio I carried contained more than just notes about dinner parties and charity events. "Well, keep playing shop," Mark smirked, waving his empty glass for a refill. "Though honestly, Rachel, you might want to stick to planning our dinner parties. The business world is cutthroat, sweetheart. Wouldn't want you to waste all that time on something that'll never turn a real profit." I nodded demurely, remembering the day 3 years ago when I'd begun quietly purchasing shares of Northwest Financial through a series of LLCs registered in my grandmother Eleanor's name. The same grandmother who had built and sold 3 successful companies before retiring, and who had secretly funded my MBA while Mark believed I was taking cooking classes during the early years of our marriage. "Did you hear about that mysterious investment group buying up financial services companies in the Pacific Northwest?" David asked, loosening his tie. "They say Green Future Holdings is behind it, but no one's ever met their CEO. Probably some tree-hugging idealists from California," Mark dismissed, checking his Rolex, the same watch he'd bought after closing a deal that had put 3 small credit unions out of business. "As long as they stay out of our territory with Pacific Trust, they can plant all the trees they want." My phone vibrated silently. A message from Jennifer Hayes, my Chief Operating Officer at Evergreen Sustainable Solutions, and my best friend since college. Final preparations complete. Board meeting scheduled for tomorrow at 10 a.m. All evidence compiled. I circulated among the guests one final time, knowing it would be my last appearance as the docile Mrs. Wilson. Tomorrow, the carefully crafted facade would shatter, and Mark would learn exactly who had been listening to his drunken boasts and documenting his casual admissions of securities fraud and insider trading for the past 3 years. The sun set over Portland's skyline as the executives continued celebrating, oblivious to the fact that in less than 12 hours, their professional world would implode. I touched the small recording device disguised as a decorative pin on my dress, confirming it was still capturing every damning word. Another round for the conquering heroes? I asked, maintaining my supportive smile. Keep them coming, sweetheart, Mark replied with a condescending wink. Tomorrow is going to be historic. For Northwest Financial. On that point, at least, we completely agreed. Back in my private office in downtown Portland, 30 floors above the noise and 20 blocks from Northwest Financial's headquarters, I finally allowed my mask to slip. The dutiful wife persona melted away as Jennifer pulled up our latest acquisition reports on the wall of screens. The transformation felt symbolic, from invisible spouse to CEO of a financial empire that had been systematically acquiring every company Mark Wilson had ever undervalued or undermined. The board members have all confirmed attendance, Jennifer reported, her fingers dancing across her tablet, including those 3 he thought were loyal to him. Amazing what people will reveal when they discover their CEO has been manipulating stock prices for personal gain. I settled behind my desk, reviewing the evidence we'd gathered. 3 years of playing the perfect corporate wife had yielded far more than recordings of drunken boasts. Mark's team had a habit of leaving confidential documents in their home offices, assuming their wives couldn't possibly understand the complex financial language. They never noticed me photographing each page with the micro camera disguised as a pendant on my necklace. Attempt to acquire Pacific Trust? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Jennifer's smile was razor sharp. Failed spectacularly this afternoon. We secured the controlling shares through our Seattle subsidiary. He doesn't know it yet, but he just lost $50 million in promised investments. The monitors displayed a complex web of corporations, all leading back to Green Future Holdings. Each node represented a company we'd rescued from Mark's predatory tactics. He had a pattern: identify promising financial service companies, especially those led by women or minorities, then use his market position to strangle their funding until they were forced to sell at pennies on the dollar. Emily Chen from HR sent the final employee lists, Jennifer continued. 187 talented people he's forced out over the past 4 years. Financial analysts, investment advisors, client relations managers, all because they didn't fit the Northwest culture. I pulled up the dossier on Mark's latest victim, a brilliant risk assessment specialist who had developed an innovative algorithm for sustainable investment portfolios. Mark had mockingly offered her half the market value for her company, suggesting she was lucky to get that much given the circumstances. The circumstances being that she was a woman in finance. Is Sophia ready with the press releases? I asked, reviewing tomorrow's timeline once more. Portland Business Journal, Financial Times, and Tech Northwest all have reporters attending the board meeting. The story is already written. They're just waiting for the dramatic reveal. My phone lit up with a message from our head of security. Surveillance confirms Wilson's team has left the club. All systems in place for tomorrow. I walked to the window, looking out at the Portland skyline, the Willamette River reflecting the city lights. Somewhere out there, Mark was probably rehearsing his triumphant board meeting speech, unaware that his presentation about the Pacific Trust acquisition would never happen. Instead, he'd face evidence of every backroom deal, every manipulated stock price, every destroyed career. The caterers for the club event have been well compensated, Jennifer added, though they're disappointed to lose their favorite client. Connection. They said you always remembered their names. I smiled, remembering the genuine relationships I'd built over the past years. Unlike Mark, I'd learned that true power comes from respecting everyone, regardless of their position. The catering staff, the drivers, the receptionists, they had become unwitting allies, sharing snippets of conversations and warning me when Mark's team was particularly loose-lipped. What about his inner circle? I asked, turning back to the monitors. All compromised. David's been embezzling through a shell company he thought was untraceable. Alex has been insider trading using his wife's account. James has been selling company secrets to competitors. We have documentation of everything. The final piece was a recording from earlier tonight. Mark explicitly discussing his plans to manipulate Pacific Trust's stock price. He'd been so busy laughing at my cute little eco-business that he never noticed the sophisticated surveillance system capturing his every word. "Send a morning meeting reminder to all board members," I instructed. "Let's make sure everyone has a front row seat to tomorrow's performance." Outside my window, Portland's lights twinkled like stars. Each one represented a life Mark Wilson had impacted through his arrogance and greed. Tomorrow, the entire city would witness his fall. Dawn arrived with military precision. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I stood in my downtown penthouse dressing room, transforming myself one final time, not into the supportive wife Mark knew, or even the secret CEO I'd become, but into something entirely new. Today's armor was a forest green Gabriella Hearst suit that cost more than Mark's monthly car payment, paired with sustainable leather heels that added just enough height to look him directly in the eyes. Facial recognition confirms Wilson just entered the building. Jennifer's voice came through my earpiece. "He's taking the express elevator looking particularly smug. Our sources say he's planning to announce the Pacific Trust acquisition before the actual deal is finalized this afternoon." I adjusted my grandmother's vintage emerald earrings, the only heirloom I'd kept after selling her house to fund Evergreen's first product line. Mark and his predatory lending practices had forced that sale, though he'd never connected Eleanor Wilson's struggling estate with the wife who planned his dinner parties. "The press?" I asked, applying one last coat of sustainable, cruelty-free lipstick. In position. Portland Business Journal and Financial Times are setting up in the boardroom. Channel 8's business correspondent arrived early. Apparently, someone leaked that today's meeting would be historically significant. I smiled, knowing that leak had been carefully orchestrated. The media's presence would ensure Mark couldn't bury this story or use his connections to spin it away. Every moment would be documented, every revelation broadcast live to the industry he'd terrorized for so long. "Board members are arriving now," Jennifer continued. Thompson and Chen looked nervous. They must have reviewed the evidence files we sent last night. Harrison's already sweating, probably realizing those offshore accounts weren't as hidden as he thought. The elevator ride to the executive floor was silent, my security team flanking me professionally. They'd been handpicked over the past year, each having their own reason to want Mark's empire dismantled. My head of security was the sister of a financial advisor who'd been blacklisted after raising ethical concerns about Mark's lending practices. "Wilson is glad handing the board members now," Jennifer updated. "Just made a joke about having champagne-worthy news. His team's with him, all looking like cats who caught the canary." I checked my watch, a custom piece that contained enough processing power to run a small server farm. In its memory were recordings of every incriminating conversation Mark had ever had in our home office, backed up to secure servers across 3 continents. The executive floor was buzzing with anticipation. Through the glass walls, I could see Mark holding court in the boardroom, his Italian suit and gold cufflinks broadcasting the success he'd built on others' destruction. The boardroom table was imported mahogany, an expense he'd approved while denying employee retirement matching beyond the legal minimum. "Security teams in position," my earpiece crackled. "FBI's Financial Crimes Unit is standing by. SEC representatives are in the adjacent conference room reviewing the final documentation." I paused outside the boardroom, watching through the glass as Mark pulled up his presentation. The title slide read, "Pacific Trust Acquisition, a New Era for Northwest Financial." If he'd bothered to check his emails this morning, he'd have seen the press release announcing Pacific Trust's acquisition by Green Future Holdings. "Everyone's in position," Jennifer confirmed. "It's time." I took one last deep breath, channeling every dismissive comment, every condescending pat on the head, every time he'd called my business a cute hobby into steely determination. The security doors slid open with a soft hiss, and every head turned toward the entrance. "I apologize for interrupting," I announced, my voice carrying the authority of someone who owned not just the room but the entire building. "But I'm afraid there's been a change to today's agenda." Mark's face transformed from confusion to recognition to disbelief in the span of seconds. The champagne glass in his hand trembled slightly as he processed the sight of his wife standing before him in CEO attire, holding a folder thick with evidence of his crimes. "Rachel," he whispered, his arrogance cracking for the first time in our 10-year marriage. "Hello, Mark," I confirmed, taking my place at the head of the table. "Now, shall we discuss the real state of Northwest Financial Advisors?" The boardroom crackled with tension as I took control of the presentation system with a single tap on my phone. Mark's triumphant Pacific Trust slides disappeared, replaced by Green Future Holdings' corporate logo. For those who haven't been formally introduced, I'm Rachel Wilson, CEO of Green Future Holdings and the majority shareholder of Northwest Financial as of 9 o'clock this morning. I began, watching Mark's face contort as he finally connected the dots. Though Mr. Wilson here knows me better as the wife who's been planning his dinner parties for the past 10 years. David Cooper knocked over his water glass. Alex from Acquisitions started frantically typing on his phone, probably trying to access the offshore accounts we'd already frozen. The board members sat in stunned silence as the screens filled with transaction records, surveillance footage, and email chains. This morning, Green Future Holdings completed its acquisition of Pacific Trust, I continued, my voice carrying enough authority to freeze Mark, who was half rising from his chair. This was the final piece in a 3-year strategy that began when we noticed a pattern of predatory acquisitions targeting women and minority-led financial service companies in the Pacific Northwest. Jennifer entered silently, distributing detailed dossiers to each board member. The folders contained everything from Mark's manipulated stock reports to recordings of him bragging about how he engineered hostile takeovers. "You can't do this," Mark finally managed, his face flushing red. "You're just a what, Mark?" I interrupted. "A housewife? A woman who should stick to planning charity events rather than running a business?" I played one of his own recordings, his drunken voice filling the room with casual misogyny. "Or perhaps you meant I'm just the CEO who now controls 58% of Northwest Financial through various subsidiaries and shell corporations." The blood drained from his face as the ownership charts appeared on screen. Every shell company, every quiet stock purchase, every strategic acquisition that had led to this moment was laid bare in devastating detail. "Mrs. Wilson," Thomas Harrison, the board chairman, cleared his throat. "Are you saying you own this company?" "As of 9 o'clock this morning, yes." I turned to the row of press representatives, their cameras capturing every moment. What I'm about to share will demonstrate how Mr. Wilson and his executive team have systematically violated SEC regulations, engaged in insider trading, and destroyed promising companies for personal gain. The next 20 minutes were a master class in corporate execution. Every piece of evidence was presented with surgical precision. Emails about price manipulation, recorded conversations about insider trading, detailed records of harassment and discrimination. "Your files," Mark suddenly blurted, reaching for his phone. "I'll delete everything." "Secured," I cut him off, "along with the contents of the private server in your Lake Oswego home office, the one containing evidence of your more creative accounting practices." David collapsed back in his chair as his own financial records appeared on screen. The complex web of embezzlement he'd woven over the years was now exposed for everyone to see. Next came Alex's insider trading records, then James's documented corporate espionage. "Federal agents are waiting outside," I announced, watching Mark's executive team exchange panicked glances. "They're particularly interested in discussing certain overseas transactions that coincidentally aligned with your recent acquisitions." The board members were now pouring through their dossiers, their expressions shifting from shock to anger as they realized how thoroughly they'd been deceived. Several were already reaching for their phones, undoubtedly calling their lawyers. As of this moment, I continued, Mark Wilson, David Cooper, Alex Reeves, and James Thornton are terminated from their positions at Northwest Financial, effective immediately. Security will escort you to your offices to collect personal belongings. Everything else has been documented and secured for the federal investigation. You can't. Mark started to rise again. Actually, she can, Jennifer interrupted, placing a document on the table. This is from the SEC. Your trading privileges have been suspended pending investigation. I'd advise against making any sudden moves with your remaining assets. I watched as Mark's carefully constructed world crumbled around him. The man who'd spent years mocking my ambitions, who'd destroyed careers with casual cruelty, was now experiencing what true powerlessness felt like. Oh, and Mark, I added as security entered the room. I believe this belongs to you. I placed a familiar crystal tumbler on the table, the one he'd always insisted on drinking his scotch from at home. Consider it a souvenir of all those nights you spent underestimating your wife. The next hour unfolded like a precisely choreographed dance as federal agents interviewed Mark and his team in separate conference rooms. I began the real work of transformation. The press had already started filing their stories. Headlines about the dramatic boardroom takedown were spreading across financial news networks. Their personal devices have been secured, Jennifer reported, tablet in hand. IT teams are imaging their computers now. Mark tried to remotely wipe his phone, but we'd already backed up everything to our secure servers. Through the glass walls, I could see Mark gesturing angrily at his lawyer, who had arrived looking disheveled and panicked. The attorney's face grew increasingly pale as he reviewed the evidence against his client. In another room, David had broken down completely, offering to testify against Mark in exchange for leniency. The employees are gathering in the main atrium, Jennifer continued. Word spreading about the executive team's arrest. HR's reporting multiple incidents of previously undisclosed harassment coming to light. I straightened my suit and headed for the elevator. It was time to address the people who'd suffered under Mark's toxic leadership. The atrium was packed when I arrived, hundreds of employees waiting anxiously to understand what was happening to their company. Good morning, I began, my voice carrying across the suddenly silent space. My name is Rachel Wilson. Until an hour ago, most of you knew me as Mark Wilson's wife. Today, I'm here as the new CEO of Northwest Financial. The murmurs started immediately. I could see recognition dawning on faces. Employees who'd witnessed Mark's condescending treatment of his wife at company events, now realizing they'd been watching a careful performance. Over the next few weeks, this company will undergo significant changes. First, I want to address the fear I know many of you are feeling. Your jobs are secure. In fact, we'll be reviewing all salaries and promotions that were denied under the previous management. Relief flooded through the crowd. Near the back, I spotted Melissa Jenkins, a brilliant financial analyst whom Mark had repeatedly passed over for promotion. She was crying quietly, years of suppressed frustration finally finding release. Effective immediately, we're implementing new harassment reporting protocols, establishing an anonymous ethics hotline, and creating a diversity and inclusion council with real power to effect change. The era of discrimination and fear is over. My phone buzzed with updates from Jennifer. Mark's country club was already reviewing his membership. The private school where our children attended had called to schedule a meeting about their future enrollment. I understand that many of you have stories to tell, I continued, addressing the growing crowd. Stories of discrimination, of blocked promotions, of ideas stolen and credited to others. Starting today, my door is open. Every story will be heard, every wrong documented and addressed. Security footage showed Mark being escorted to a waiting federal vehicle. His Italian suit wrinkled, his arrogant demeanor shattered. Through the building's windows, employees gathered to watch his humiliating exit, years of pent-up resentment finally finding satisfaction. "The press is requesting follow-up interviews," Jennifer whispered, approaching with a stack of urgent messages. "CNN wants to do a special on women in finance who fight back against discrimination. Thompson from the Portland Business Journal is asking about your background. Apparently, he connected you to your grandmother's company." I nodded, remembering the day Mark's predatory lending practices had forced my grandmother to sell her life's work. He'd never bothered to learn the names of the family members behind the companies he destroyed. That oversight had proved fatal to his empire. "Schedule a company-wide town hall for tomorrow morning," I instructed Jennifer. "Have HR prepare complete audits of all personnel decisions made under Mark's leadership. And contact Pacific Trust. I want to meet with their leadership team about integrating their sustainable investment algorithms across our platforms." The atrium was still buzzing with excitement and disbelief. Decades of corporate culture were being dismantled in real time, replaced by something new and potentially transformative. Through the glass ceiling, I could see the Portland skyline, the same view I'd had from countless company events where I'd planned this day while Mark laughed at my supposed business naivete. By evening, the financial world was in upheaval. Every major news outlet had picked up the story, running headlines about the CEO's wife, who had orchestrated one of the most sophisticated corporate takedowns in recent history. Social media was flooded with stories from former employees and competitors, each sharing their own experiences with Mark's tyranny. "The SEC has frozen their personal accounts," Jennifer reported as we reviewed the day's developments in my new office, Mark's former sanctuary of mahogany and privilege. "They found some interesting transactions. Apparently, Mark was planning to short Pacific Trust stock before forcing the acquisition." I moved his pretentious art collection into storage, replacing it with works from local Portland artists he'd dismissed as too alternative for corporate decor. His custom leather chair, which he'd bragged cost more than a junior analyst's monthly salary, would be auctioned off to fund a new employee education program. "What's the status on the external audits?" I asked, reviewing the stack of reports HR had compiled. "We've identified 56 instances of qualified candidates being passed over for promotion, all sharing a similar pattern. Women, minorities, anyone who challenged Mark's authority. Their careers hit invisible ceilings." The monitors displayed a steady stream of email responses from industry leaders. Companies that had once courted Mark's favor were now rushing to distance themselves. His name was being scrubbed from board positions, charity committees, and speaking engagements. "His wife's lawyer called," Jennifer added with a slight smile. "Apparently, she's fascinated to learn about the offshore accounts he never disclosed during their prenup negotiations. She's offering to share some interesting financial records." A notification popped up. Another former employee had gone public with their story. This time, it was a young Black financial advisor whose client portfolio had been stolen and reassigned under Mark's direct orders. The clients would be rightfully returned tomorrow, along with back commissions. "The club staff sent this over," Jennifer said, placing a bottle of Mark's favorite scotch on my desk. "They said it's been interesting watching the security footage of his previous visits now that they understand what was really happening." I smiled, remembering the genuine friendships I'd built with the wait staff. Unlike Mark, they'd seen past appearances, treating everyone with respect regardless of perceived status. They'd become unwitting allies in his downfall, their observations providing valuable insights into his network and vulnerabilities. "Pacific Trust CEO is online," Jennifer announced. "Their team is excited about the merger, especially now that they understand it's a true partnership, not a hostile takeover." The call was brief, but productive. Unlike Mark's approach of crushing innovation, we would preserve Pacific Trust's culture and independence while providing resources for expansion. Their groundbreaking sustainable investment algorithms would revolutionize wealth management across our combined platforms. Legal just finished reviewing the employee complaints. Jennifer continued after the call. They've identified at least 9 potential class action suits. Several law firms are already preparing cases. Through the window, I watched the sunset paint Portland's skyline in shades of gold. The same view Mark had enjoyed while plotting the destruction of countless careers was now witness to the beginning of something better. What about his inner circle? I asked, though the monitors already told the story. David's cooperation with federal investigators has been enthusiastic. Alex's wife filed for divorce after learning about his insider trading using her accounts. James is trying to negotiate immunity in exchange for information about other corporate espionage targets. A message flashed across my screen. Mark's exclusive golf club membership had been revoked. The institution he'd used to broker backroom deals and exclude undesirable executives was now closing its doors to him. His carefully cultivated network of privilege was unraveling thread by thread. Schedule a meeting with the development team tomorrow, I instructed. It's time to revive some of the projects Mark killed, particularly Melissa Jenkins' Sustainable Investment Initiative and Dr. Rodriguez's Financial Literacy Program. Jennifer nodded, adding to her ever-growing list. Oh, and one more thing. Mark's lawyer quit. Apparently, he found some conflicts of interest after reviewing the complete evidence package. Morning brought fresh revelations. The financial press had dug deeper into Mark's past, uncovering a pattern of destruction that stretched back decades. Companies he'd claimed to have saved were revealed as victims of calculated sabotage, their innovations stolen, their founders discredited. His defense strategy leaked, Jennifer announced, entering my office with her morning briefing. He's claiming you manipulated him, used your position as his wife to gather privileged information. His new lawyer's trying to paint this as corporate espionage. I pulled up the surveillance footage from our home office, displaying dozens of clips of Mark freely bragging about his illegal activities to colleagues during dinner parties I'd arranged. Send these to the prosecutor's office. Let's see him explain how being overheard breaking the law in his own home constitutes espionage. The company's internal transformation was already visible. Teams that had been siloed under Mark's leadership were collaborating openly. Ideas that had been suppressed were finding new life in the development wing. Melissa Jenkins was leading a meeting about her sustainable investment project, her confidence growing with each passing hour. The external audit team found something deeply troubling, Jennifer continued. Mark had a secret ranking system for employees. Anyone he deemed culturally unsuitable was automatically passed over for promotion regardless of performance. The list was illuminating. Brilliant minds systematically suppressed because they didn't fit Mark's narrow vision of success. Each name represented talent wasted, innovations stifled, careers derailed by prejudice masked as corporate policy. Institute an immediate review of all performance evaluations from the past 5 years, I instructed. Cross-reference them with actual project contributions. I want to know every instance where credit was stolen or accomplishments buried. A notification flashed. Another of Mark's victims had come forward. This time it was a former VP who'd been forced out after questioning the company's ethical practices. Her detailed records of corporate malfeasance would prove invaluable to prosecutors. The board's ethics committee is waiting in conference room A, Jennifer reported. They've reviewed the complete evidence package and want to discuss implementing new oversight protocols. Before heading to the meeting, I paused at my office window. Below, workers were removing Mark's reserved parking sign, a small but symbolic change. His precious imported car had been impounded by federal agents, along with other assets potentially purchased with ill-gotten gains. Update from the FBI's forensic accounting team, Jennifer added. They've traced the money from that mysterious server crash last year, the one that destroyed evidence of workplace harassment. Payments went through 7 shell companies before landing in Mark's private account. The ethics committee meeting was productive. Board members who'd once rubber-stamped Mark's decisions were now eager to establish real accountability. Every proposal for reform was met with enthusiastic support, their fear of legal liability converting into genuine commitment to change. Pacific Trust's integration team arrived early, Jennifer reported after the meeting. They're already collaborating with our development group on expanding their sustainable investment protocols. The energy in the tech department is incredible. Walking through the office, I could feel the shift in atmosphere. Employees who'd once hurried past executive offices with downcast eyes now moved with purpose. Conversations were animated, ideas flowing freely without fear of retaliation or theft. Mark's Financial Leadership Award isn't the only thing he's lost, Jennifer noted, checking her tablet. The prestigious Innovation in Finance Award he was scheduled to receive next month. The committee saw our evidence and decided to give it to Maria Diaz instead, the analyst whose risk assessment algorithm he claimed as his own. The monitors tracked the continuing fallout. Mark's carefully constructed reputation was unraveling across every platform. Industry leaders who'd once sought his mentorship were publicly denouncing his methods. Companies began internal reviews, fearing they might harbor similar toxic practices. His alma mater called, Jennifer added with satisfaction. They're removing him from their distinguished alumni wall. Apparently, federal indictments don't align with their values. They're also returning his donations and redirecting the funds to scholarships for women in finance. A message from legal demanded immediate attention. Mark was attempting one last desperate move. In his arrogance, he'd forgotten about the non-compete clause he'd insisted every executive sign. Now, those same restrictive terms would prevent him from working in finance, even if he escaped prison time. The financial industry's response to Mark's downfall was seismic. Companies across the country began internal audits, desperate to ensure they weren't harboring similar toxic practices. 3 major CEOs had already stepped down, their leadership styles suddenly under intense scrutiny. Green Future Holdings stock is up 35%, Jennifer reported during our afternoon briefing. The market's responding to our transparency and the planned integration of Pacific Trust's sustainable investment protocols. More importantly, 4 other financial service companies have reached out about potential partnerships. On the monitors, footage from Mark's FBI interview played silently. His trademark arrogance had crumbled under sustained questioning. Each attempt to justify his actions only revealed deeper layers of corruption. His new lawyer sat beside him, growing visibly more distressed as Mark inadvertently implicated himself in additional crimes. His charity foundation found something interesting, Jennifer continued. Remember that financial literacy program for underserved communities that Mark claimed to support? Turns out he was using it to launder money from his market manipulation schemes. The FBI is investigating every donation he's made in the past decade. The report sparked another wave of resignations from charitable boards where Mark had held positions. Organizations that had once proudly displayed his name as a benefactor were now frantically distancing themselves, their own reputations at risk. The employee interviews are yielding disturbing patterns, Jennifer added, pulling up HR's latest findings. Mark didn't just block promotions, he actively sabotaged careers. Anyone he saw as a threat would suddenly find their projects reassigned, their achievements credited to others, their reputations quietly undermined. I reviewed the growing list of victims, each name representing talent wasted and dreams deferred. Marcus Rodriguez, whose revolutionary community banking initiative had been stolen and patented under Mark's name. Dr. Sarah Kim, whose groundbreaking financial accessibility research had been buried because she refused his advances. Dozens more, their innovations suppressed or stolen to maintain Mark's illusion of superiority. The club staff sent over their security footage, Jennifer said, a hint of satisfaction in her voice. 10 years of Mark's business dinners, every boast and confession captured in high definition. His lawyer's face when he saw the compilation was memorable. Through my office window, I watched workers installing new signage on the building. The Northwest Financial logo was being replaced with a design that incorporated elements from both our companies, a physical manifestation of the transformation underway. David's cooperation is proving invaluable, Jennifer noted, referring to Mark's former CFO. He's provided documentation of every market manipulation scheme, every falsified report, every instance of insider trading. The SEC investigators are calling it a treasure trove of evidence. My phone buzzed with an urgent update. Mark had attempted to access the company's servers from a hidden terminal in his home office. Our IT team had been waiting for this, tracking his desperate attempt to delete incriminating files. Each keystroke only added to the evidence against him. The industry conference committee called, Jennifer continued. They want you to deliver the keynote address next month. The topic, Transforming Financial Culture, from Toxicity to Transparency. They're particularly interested in our new corporate governance model. The afternoon brought a stream of revelations. 3 more companies Mark had destroyed were identified, their founders coming forward with detailed accounts of his predatory tactics. Financial blogs were running exposés on his mentorship program, revealing it as a sophisticated system for identifying and eliminating potential competitors. His mother's foundation issued a statement, Jennifer added, displaying the press release. They're renaming the scholarship program he endowed and redirecting the funds to support underrepresented groups in finance. Apparently, she's horrified by his actions and wants to be part of the solution. A notification indicated that Mark's personal assistant had begun cooperating with investigators. The woman who'd once shielded him from consequences was now methodically documenting every instance of misconduct she'd witnessed. Her detailed records would prove devastating to his already crumbling defense. The federal investigation is expanding, Jennifer concluded. They're looking into similar patterns at other companies in his network. This could be the beginning of a major industry cleanup. The weekend brought no respite for Mark's crumbling empire. While he sat in federal custody, unable to make bail due to flight risk concerns, his world continued to implode. Major financial publications were running special features examining how someone so openly toxic had maintained power for so long. The venture capital firms are scrambling, Jennifer reported, bringing in the Saturday morning briefing. 3 major funds that backed Mark's hostile takeovers have launched internal investigations. Their limited partners are demanding answers about due diligence procedures. The monitors displayed real-time updates from various investigative teams. Each hour brought new discoveries: hidden accounts, buried harassment settlements, systematic discrimination carefully disguised as business strategy. Mark's digital footprint was becoming a roadmap of corporate malfeasance. His fraternity brothers are distancing themselves, Jennifer continued, pulling up social media analyses. Remember how he bragged about that elite business network? They've scrubbed him from their history and are implementing new membership screening protocols. Through the glass walls of my office, I could see teams working through the weekend. Not from fear, as under Mark's regime, but from genuine excitement. The Sustainable Investment Group, led by previously sidelined analysts, had made a breakthrough that could revolutionize wealth management for environmentally conscious clients. Pacific Trust integration is exceeding expectations, Jennifer noted. Their team found synergies we hadn't even considered. The combined sustainable investment technology is already attracting attention from major institutional investors. My phone lit up with a message from the FBI's Forensic Accounting Unit. They'd discovered a pattern in Mark's charitable donations. One coincided with a suspicious market movement or corporate raid. His philanthropy had been a sophisticated money laundering operation. The class action lawsuit is growing, Jennifer added. Over 200 former employees have joined. Their stories are remarkably consistent. Careers derailed, innovations stolen, dignity systematically stripped away through calculated humiliation. The evidence room, once Mark's private conference suite, now housed thousands of documents, chronicling his decades of destruction. Each file represented a life impacted, a dream deferred, an innovation suppressed to maintain his illusion of superiority. His college roommate came forward, Jennifer said, displaying a new email. Apparently, Mark's first successful investment strategy wasn't his at all. He stole the algorithm from a scholarship student, then used legal threats to force them out of the industry. They're willing to testify. Outside, Portland's weekend traffic moved steadily past our building. How many drivers, I wondered, had been impacted by Mark's toxic influence? How many brilliant minds had been forced to abandon finance dreams because they didn't fit his narrow definition of success? The club staff sent over something interesting, Jennifer continued. Security footage from 3 years ago shows Mark bragging about how he destroyed your grandmother's company. He actually laughed about forcing a stubborn old woman into selling. I remembered that day clearly, watching my grandmother sign away her life's work, Mark's smug face across the negotiating table. He'd never bothered to learn her name, never realized that the wife he mocked was the granddaughter of a woman whose innovation he'd stolen. The federal prosecutors want to meet Monday, Jennifer noted. They're particularly interested in the pattern of targeting women-led financial companies. They're building a case for systematic discrimination under RICO statutes. A notification indicated that Mark's private jet had been seized. The aircraft, purchased with funds from questionable sources, would likely be auctioned to help compensate his victims. His pilot had provided investigators with logs showing suspicious flights to offshore banking havens. The Financial Ethics Conference called again, Jennifer added. They want to create a case study based on our takeover and transformation. They're calling it The Wife Who Changed Wall Street. The name made me smile, thinking of all those nights hosting dinner parties while Mark and his cronies bragged about their latest conquests. Their assumption that a wife couldn't understand their technical discussions had been their ultimate undoing. And one more thing, Jennifer concluded, a rare smile crossing her face. Mark's prized watch collection, the one he claimed was worth millions, the authentication board just confirmed they're all counterfeits. Apparently, his luxury lifestyle was as fake as his success. Monday dawned with a fresh wave of revelations. Federal agents had spent the weekend executing search warrants at various properties owned by Mark's shell companies. Each location yielded new evidence of financial misconduct and corporate manipulation. His private storage unit was a gold mine, Jennifer reported, spreading photographs across my desk. They found original documents from companies he destroyed, business plans, patent applications, prototype designs. He kept them as trophies. The images showed rows of carefully archived materials, each folder labeled with the name of a company he'd crushed. It was a museum of corporate predation, a physical catalog of dreams he'd stolen and innovations he'd suppressed. The financial industry watchdog groups are using this as a catalyst, Jennifer continued. 3 major investment firms have already announced complete audits of their acquisition histories. They're terrified of being associated with similar practices. Through my office window, I watched a group of formerly sidelined advisors heading to their morning meeting. Under Mark's leadership, they'd been relegated to managing small, unprofitable accounts. Now, their innovative community investment strategies were revolutionizing our client outreach programs. The federal investigation has expanded, Jennifer noted, pulling up new reports. They're looking into the entire network of venture capital firms and private equity groups that enabled Mark's tactics. Several major players are already cooperating to save themselves. My phone buzzed with updates from our legal team. Mark's attempts to negotiate a plea deal had been rejected. The evidence was too overwhelming, the pattern of destruction too deliberate. Prosecutors were confident in their case, particularly with David's detailed testimony. His former executive assistant provided access to his private calendar, Jennifer added. It reads like a master class in corporate terrorism. every meeting meticulously planned to identify potential targets and orchestrate their downfall. The calendar revealed a systematic approach to destruction. Monday meetings to identify promising startups. Tuesday strategy sessions to plan their demise. Wednesday celebrations of another successful takeover. Each entry a new chapter in his book of corporate predation. The employee support program is showing results, Jennifer continued, switching to internal updates. The counseling services have been overwhelmed with people finally feeling safe, enough to share their experiences. The stories are difficult to hear. I reviewed the preliminary reports, accounts of careers systematically destroyed, innovations buried, lives impacted by Mark's toxic leadership. Each testimony added to the growing picture of calculated destruction masked as business strategy. Pacific Trust team made a breakthrough, Jennifer noted, her tone lightening. The combined sustainable investment protocols are performing beyond expectations. 3 major pension funds have already expressed interest. The development floor was buzzing with energy. Teams that had been artificially separated under Mark's leadership were now collaborating freely. Ideas flowed without fear of theft or suppression, innovation flourishing in the absence of toxic control. The industry conference organizers called again, Jennifer said. They want to expand your keynote into a full panel discussion, transforming financial culture, a case study in corporate rehabilitation. Several other CEOs want to learn from our approach. A notification flashed. Another of Mark's victims had come forward, a brilliant young analyst whose community banking breakthrough had been stolen and buried because it threatened Mark's existing products. Her documentation would add another layer to the federal case. His social circle is imploding, Jennifer reported, checking social media analytics. The elite clubs, the charity boards, the business roundtables, they're all rushing to erase any connection to him. His name is becoming toxic in every sphere he once dominated. Through the glass walls, I could see the former executive suite being transformed into a collaborative innovation space. Mark's mahogany fortress was becoming a transparent workspace where ideas could flow freely, regardless of their source. And this just came in, Jennifer concluded, displaying a final message. The prestigious Financial Leadership Award he won last year? The committee is not just rescinding it. They're establishing a new scholarship program for underrepresented groups in finance, funded by the fines from his case. The impact of Mark's downfall rippled through the financial world like a digital tsunami. By Tuesday afternoon, a pattern emerged of other financial executives quietly stepping down, their leadership styles and acquisition histories suddenly under intense scrutiny. The FBI's forensic team found something interesting in his home office, Jennifer announced, entering with the latest updates. Hidden behind his pretentious art collection was a safe containing USB drives. Each one holds detailed plans for destroying competing companies, some he hadn't even targeted yet. I reviewed the list of potential targets: innovative startups, women-led financial firms, companies developing technologies that could threaten his market position. Each file meticulously detailed vulnerabilities to exploit, people to compromise, strategies to destroy. His personal correspondence is particularly damning, Jennifer continued. He had a network of informants in venture capital firms tipping him off about promising startups before they went public. He'd then position himself as a mentor, gathering intelligence for future takeovers. The monitors displayed a steady stream of resignations across the financial sector. Board members who'd enabled similar practices were stepping down. Venture capitalists who'd participated in predatory acquisitions were facing investor revolts. The industry's power structure was experiencing an unprecedented shakeup. Melissa's sustainable investment team achieved something remarkable, Jennifer noted, changing topics. Without Mark's restrictions, they've developed a portfolio strategy that outperforms traditional models while maintaining strict environmental standards. 3 major institutional investors have already reached out about adopting it. Through The glass walls, I watched the transformation of our workspace. The hierarchical layout that had defined Mark's era was being replaced by collaborative spaces. The executive floor, once a fortress of privilege, now buzzed with innovation and free exchange of ideas. The federal prosecutors added new charges, Jennifer reported, checking her tablet. They're treating his pattern of targeting women-led companies as a separate RICO violation. His lawyer's attempting to negotiate again, but they're not interested in deals. My phone lit up with an urgent message. Mark had attempted to access offshore accounts from the federal detention center. His clumsy effort had revealed 3 more hidden financial networks, each one a new thread for investigators to unravel. The Financial Ethics Board is implementing new industry guidelines, Jennifer added. They're calling them the Wilson Protocols, standards, for identifying and preventing predatory corporate practices. Several major companies have already pledged to adopt them. A notification indicated that Mark's private art collection, which he'd bragged about endlessly, was being examined by authenticators. Initial findings suggested that, like his watches, many pieces were elaborate fakes, props in his carefully constructed illusion of success. His alma mater made an interesting discovery, Jennifer continued. The prestigious thesis that launched his career plagiarized from a female student's work. She was forced out of the program after raising concerns. She's now a key witness for the prosecution. The afternoon brought a surge of media attention. Financial publications were running in-depth analyses of how toxic leadership had become normalized in the industry. Our transformation was being held up as a model for corporate rehabilitation. Pacific Trust's integration hit a milestone, Jennifer noted with satisfaction. The combined teams developed an investment protocol that makes our competitors' systems look prehistoric. The patent applications are already filed under the actual inventors' names this time. I walk through the development floor, noting the energy in the air. Teams that had once competed for resources now collaborated freely. Ideas flowed without fear of theft or suppression. Innovation flourished in the absence of toxic control. The investigation uncovered another pattern, Jennifer reported back in my office. Mark had a systematic way of identifying and eliminating potential whistleblowers. HR would receive anonymous complaints, followed by sudden performance issues, leading to quiet terminations. The list of silenced voices was long. Advisors who questioned unethical practices, managers who reported discrimination, employees who dared to innovate beyond Mark's control. Each story added another layer to the federal case, another crack in his crumbling defense. One last update, Jennifer concluded. The scholarship fund he claimed was supporting women in finance? They've renamed their annual innovation award. It's now the Eleanor Wilson Memorial Grant, in honor of your grandmother's contributions to the industry. Wednesday brought a cascade of unexpected developments. The financial industry's upheaval had caught the attention of congressional investigators, who announced hearings on predatory acquisition practices in the banking sector. Mark's case was becoming a catalyst for systemic change. His defense? Team quit, Jennifer announced during our morning briefing. The evidence from those USB drives was the final straw. Apparently, documenting plans to destroy companies years in advance demonstrates a level of premeditation they can't defend. The monitors displayed live coverage of federal agents raiding offices across the country. Mark's network of corporate spies and informants was unraveling, each arrest revealing new connections and conspiracies. The venture capital firms are in full panic mode, Jennifer continued. 3 major funds that backed Mark's hostile takeovers have lost their largest investors. The limited partners are demanding complete audits of all financial acquisitions from the past decade. Through my office window, I watched a group of recently promoted analysts heading to the Sustainable Investment Lab. Their project, suppressed under Mark's leadership because it threatened his traditional revenue streams, was now revolutionizing our entire approach to wealth management. Pacific Trust integration reached another milestone, Jennifer reported. The combined teams discovered that their sustainable investment protocol has applications we never imagined: pension fund management, municipal bonds, even microfinance initiatives. We're years ahead of the competition. My phone buzzed with updates from the federal investigation. Mark's attempt to negotiate from detention had backfired spectacularly. His offers to name names had only revealed the extent of his own culpability, adding evidence to the prosecution's case. The industry response continues to evolve, Jennifer noted, pulling up media coverage. 4 major financial institutions have announced complete overhauls of their acquisition practices. They're implementing versions of our transparency protocols, hoping to avoid similar scandals. The transformation within our own company was equally dramatic. The hierarchical structure that had defined Mark's era was being replaced by collaborative teams. Innovation flowed freely, unrestrained by ego or artificial barriers. His private investment club is imploding, Jennifer added. The elite financial network he bragged about? Turns out it was basically a cartel for market manipulation. The SEC is investigating every member's trading history. A notification flashed. Another of Mark's victims had come forward, a brilliant developer whose fintech startup had pioneered ethical AI for credit scoring. Mark had buried their innovation because it would have required more transparent lending practices. Their testimony would add another chapter to the prosecution's narrative. The Financial Ethics Conference requested an update, Jennifer continued. They want to include a real-time case study of our transformation. Apparently, we've become a model for corporate rehabilitation in the industry. Through the glass walls, I could see the former executive dining room being converted into a collaborative workspace. The space where Mark had once held court, mocking lesser employees, was becoming an innovation hub open to all team members. The federal investigation revealed something interesting about his philanthropy, Jennifer reported. His charitable donations coincided with suspicious market movements. He was using nonprofit boards to gather intelligence on potential acquisition targets. My tablet displayed live updates from the employee support program. Teams that had been silenced under Mark's regime were now flourishing. Ideas suppressed for years were finding new life, driving innovation across every department. The Industry Awards Committee made it official, Jennifer noted. They're establishing the Green Future Innovation Grant, specifically for entrepreneurs who face discrimination in finance. The first year's funding comes entirely from Mark's forfeited assets. The afternoon brought news from the prosecution team. Mark's detailed records of his corporate raids had become a roadmap for investigators. Each file revealed new victims, new crimes, new evidence of systematic destruction masked as business strategy. One last thing, Jennifer concluded. Remember that coffee shop where he told me I belonged instead of in the financial world? They want to partner with us on a scholarship program for aspiring female analysts. They're calling it the Never Underestimate Initiative. Thursday's revelations hit the financial world like methodically placed demolition charges, each disclosure bringing down another pillar of Mark's carefully constructed empire. The federal investigation had expanded beyond individual crimes to expose an entire ecosystem of corporate predation. His private server yielded unexpected data, Jennifer reported, spreading new evidence across my desk. He kept detailed rankings of potential targets, a kind of predator's playbook. Companies were scored based on vulnerability, with extra points for female or minority leadership. The documents revealed a systematic approach to destruction. Step 1. Identify promising innovations. Step 2. Infiltrate through mentor programs. Step 3. Manipulate market conditions. Step 4. Force distressed sales. Each move, calculated. Each victim carefully chosen. The Congressional Committee expanded their investigation, Jennifer continued. They're looking at similar patterns across the industry. 3 major financial CEOs have already received subpoenas. Mark's case is becoming a blueprint for identifying corporate predation. Through the development floor windows, I watched teams that had once competed, now collaborating on breakthrough projects. The Sustainable Investment Group had merged with Pacific Trust's data science team. Their combined innovations already attracting attention from major ethical investment funds. The industry response has been seismic, Jennifer noted, pulling up market analyses. Companies are rushing to implement anti-predatory policies. Venture capital firms are overhauling their due diligence procedures. Mark's downfall is reshaping how finance does business. My phone lit up with a message from the federal prosecutors. Mark's latest attempt to negotiate had revealed even more crimes. In his desperation to reduce charges, he'd implicated dozens of co-conspirators, each revelation spawning new investigations. His wife's forensic accountants found something interesting, Jennifer added. The trust fund he claimed would protect his assets? It's largely empty. He'd been using it to funnel money into secret ventures, all focused on destroying competitors. The monitors tracked real-time market reactions as each new disclosure hit the press. Companies associated with Mark's practices saw their stocks plummet. Those embracing transparency and ethical leadership were surging. The market itself was enforcing accountability. The employee counseling program made a breakthrough, Jennifer reported. A group of former employees who'd been silenced by NDAs found a legal loophole. Their collective testimony about systematic discrimination could extend the statute of limitations on earlier crimes. Our legal team had already begun the process of voiding Mark's restrictive NDAs. Each released employee brought forward new evidence, new stories of suppressed innovations and destroyed careers. The pattern of destruction stretched back decades. Pacific Trust integration hit another milestone, Jennifer noted with satisfaction. The combined teams discovered their technologies have applications for community banking we never imagined. 3 major credit unions have already requested partnerships. The afternoon brought news from the Financial Ethics Conference. They weren't just studying our transformation, they were using it to create new industry standards. The Wilson protocols were being adopted by companies worldwide, each implementation another nail in the coffin of predatory business practices. His prison interview request was denied, Jennifer mentioned, checking her tablet. The prosecutors believe he's still trying to manipulate the narrative. His latest lawyer quit after discovering he'd lied about key evidence. Through my office window, I could see the city skyline, the same view I'd had from countless dinner parties while gathering evidence of Mark's crimes. Each building represented countless careers impacted by his toxic influence, and now each stood, witness to his downfall. One final update, Jennifer concluded. Remember that coding boot camp for financial technology that he mocked for accepting unqualified candidates? They just received a major grant to expand their program for underrepresented groups in fintech. The funding came from seized assets in Mark's case. The day ended with a symbolic transformation. The executive parking garage, once reserved for Mark's inner circle, was being converted into an innovation lab. The space where he'd parked his luxury cars would soon house the next generation of financial breakthroughs, developed by the very people he'd tried to exclude from the industry. 1 month after Mark's dramatic downfall, I stood in the club's private dining room for the last time. The venue was hosting a special event, a gathering of entrepreneurs whose companies he'd tried to destroy, now thriving under the new financial landscape we'd helped create. The final numbers are in, Jennifer announced, joining me at what had once been the table where Mark held court. Mark's guilty plea covered everything: 42 counts of securities fraud, 31 violations of antitrust laws, and over 150 documented cases of discrimination and corporate sabotage. The room buzzed with energy as successful founders shared their stories. Maria Diaz, whose risk assessment technology was revolutionizing community lending. Dr. Patel, whose ethical finance protocols were becoming industry standard. Melissa Jenkins, whose sustainable investment strategies were transforming wealth management. The industry transformation exceeded expectations, Jennifer continued, reviewing the latest reports. 23 major financial institutions have adopted our transparency protocols. Venture capital firms are completely overhauling their due diligence procedures. The Wilson standards are becoming mandatory for new acquisitions. Through the windows, Portland's skyline glittered in the evening light. Each building represented countless careers now freed from toxic leadership, innovations no longer suppressed by predatory practices. The financial landscape was experiencing a renaissance of creativity and inclusion. Pacific Trust's integration is complete, Jennifer noted with satisfaction. The combined technologies have applications we never imagined: ethical AI for loan approvals, sustainable investment scoring, community-focused wealth management. We're years ahead of the market, and this time, the breakthroughs are properly credited to their creators. My phone displayed updates from the federal investigation. Mark's network of corporate spies and market manipulators had been completely dismantled. His guilty plea had triggered a cascade of confessions across the industry, each revelation leading to more reforms. The employee rehabilitation program exceeded all metrics, Jennifer reported. 237 careers restored, 36 innovations reassigned to their rightful creators, and over 1,000 NDAs voided. The talent he suppressed is finally free to innovate. The club staff, my former unwitting allies, moved efficiently through the crowd. They'd been essential in gathering evidence, their careful observations helping to document Mark's crimes. Each had received stock options in the transformed company, their futures now secure. His asset forfeiture is complete, Jennifer added, checking her tablet. Everything he stole has been returned with interest. The remainder is funding scholarships and startup grants for underrepresented groups in finance. His entire fortune will be used to repair the damage he caused. A notification indicated that Mark's sentencing was scheduled for next week. The prosecution's recommendation was unprecedented: decades in federal prison, lifetime bans from financial services, and complete forfeiture of all assets gained through illegal activities. The Financial Ethics Conference made it official, Jennifer noted. They're establishing a permanent watchdog division, funded by penalties from corporate misconduct cases. Its first mission is implementing the Wilson protocols industry-wide. The evening's highlight was the announcement of the Green Future Innovation Fund, a $1 billion initiative to support entrepreneurs who'd faced discrimination in finance. The fund's first investments would go to startups led by people Mark had personally targeted, their innovations finally receiving proper support. One last thing, Jennifer said, her voice softening slightly. Your grandmother's original investment strategies have been restored. Her community banking protocols, the ones Mark buried after forcing her company's sale, are being integrated into our new systems. Her innovations will help protect the next generation of entrepreneurs. I touched the emerald earrings I always wore. My grandmother's last gift before Mark's hostile takeover forced her retirement. She hadn't lived to see his downfall, but her legacy would now help prevent others from facing similar persecution. The club staff has a request, Jennifer concluded. They want to rename his favorite private dining room. It'll now be called the Never Underestimate Lounge, a reminder that true talent can be found anywhere if you look with the right eyes. As I surveyed the room filled with successful founders and innovators, each with their own story of overcoming Mark's toxic influence, I realized that the best revenge wasn't just his destruction. It was the creation of something better in his place. The financial industry was transforming, becoming what it should have been all along, a place where innovation thrived regardless of gender, race, or background. The wife he'd mocked had not just bought his company and fired him publicly, she'd created a legacy that would long outlast his name. 2 months after Mark's dramatic fall from grace, the transformation of Northwest Financial was complete. The building itself had undergone a physical metamorphosis, glass walls replacing dark mahogany panels, open collaborative spaces instead of hierarchical corner offices, and a living wall of plants in the main atrium symbolizing our commitment to sustainable finance. The quarterly numbers exceeded all projections, Jennifer announced, entering my office with a stack of reports. Our sustainable investment portfolios outperformed traditional models by 3%. More importantly, employee retention has increased by 65% since the restructuring. I reviewed the data, remembering how Mark had once insisted that green investments were nothing but a passing fad, suitable only for naive idealists. His narrow vision had blinded him to the massive market potential, a blindness I had carefully exploited while building evergreen sustainable solutions in the shadows of his dismissal. The Wilson Protocol's implementation report arrived, Jennifer continued, setting another folder on my desk. 26 major financial institutions have now adopted our transparency standards. The Federal Reserve is considering making elements of them mandatory for all banks over a certain size. The protocols, named ironically after the man whose toxic practices had inspired them, had become a new gold standard in the industry. What began as my personal revenge against a dismissive husband had evolved into a movement transforming financial services across the country. Mark's sentencing is scheduled for tomorrow, Jennifer noted, checking her tablet. The prosecution is seeking a 17-year sentence with no possibility of parole. His lawyers are still trying to negotiate, but the evidence is overwhelming. Through my office window, I could see Portland's financial district gleaming in the morning sun. From this same vantage point, Mark had once surveyed his domain like a feudal lord, never suspecting that his queen was methodically orchestrating his downfall. The thought brought a smile to my face, not from malice, but from satisfaction at just how thoroughly the ecosystem was healing after removing its apex predator. The employee rehabilitation program reached another milestone, Jennifer reported. 97% of the staff impacted by Mark's discriminatory practices have been appropriately compensated and repositioned. The remaining 3% opted for early retirement with enhanced packages. The rehabilitation program had been my first priority after taking control. Years of watching Mark systematically crush talented people, particularly women and minorities, had made me determined to repair the damage he'd caused. It wasn't just about justice. It was about reclaiming the innovation and creativity he'd suppressed. Pacific Trust integration is showing remarkable results, Jennifer continued. Their sustainable investment algorithms paired with our client network has increased portfolio performance across all metrics. The combined client satisfaction ratings are at 94%, the highest in the industry. The merger that Mark had planned as a hostile takeover had instead become a model of collaborative integration under my leadership. Rather than absorbing and dismantling Pacific Trust's innovative approaches, we had created something greater than the sum of its parts. The Philanthropic Foundation Board meets this afternoon, Jennifer added. They've finalized the first round of grants from the Wilson Reparation Fund. 37 entrepreneurs directly harmed by Mark's practices will receive funding to restart their innovations. I nodded in satisfaction. The fund, created entirely from Mark's forfeited assets, was perhaps the most fitting consequence of his downfall. The very fortune he'd amassed by destroying others' dreams would now fuel a renaissance of financial innovation focused on sustainability and inclusion. And Eleanor's Legacy Initiative launches next week, Jennifer concluded with a genuine smile. The training program for women in sustainable finance already has 300 applicants. Your grandmother would be proud. The initiative, named after my grandmother whose own financial innovations had been stolen by Mark years ago, represented the culmination of my vision. Not just revenge, but restoration, creating opportunities for those who had been systematically excluded from the industry. My phone buzzed with a notification. The CEO of Portland's largest bank wanted to discuss adopting our sustainable investment models. another domino falling in the transformation of the financial landscape. The press for Mark's sentencing tomorrow will be significant, Jennifer noted. Several major networks have requested interviews with you afterward. How do you want to handle it? I considered for a moment. Schedule one exclusive with Financial Times. Focus on the reforms, not on Mark. This isn't about him anymore. It's about the future we're building. Jennifer nodded, understanding as always. In the early days, the story had been irresistibly personal. The wife who bought her husband's company and fired him publicly. But the narrative had evolved into something far more significant than one man's comeuppance. The congressional committee sent their preliminary findings, Jennifer said, pulling up a document on her tablet. They're using Northwest Financial as a case study in predatory acquisition patterns. The report specifically cites 15 of Mark's takeovers as evidence of systematic market manipulation. The committee's investigation, sparked by Mark's dramatic downfall, had expanded into a comprehensive examination of toxic practices throughout the financial industry. What began as my private vendetta was catalyzing regulatory reforms that would prevent others from suffering similar fates. The Employee Innovation Showcase opens at noon, Jennifer reminded me, checking her schedule. Melissa Jenkins is presenting her community banking platform. Early reviews suggest it could revolutionize local lending in underserved areas. The showcase, featuring projects that had been suppressed under Mark's leadership, had become a quarterly tradition, a celebration of the talent and creativity that had been hidden in plain sight. Many of these innovations had since become cornerstone products in our reformed business. One more thing, Jennifer added as she headed for the door. Mark's mother called. She wants to meet with you privately after the sentencing tomorrow. The request surprised me. Eleanor Wilson had been frosty toward me throughout my marriage to Mark, consistently taking her son's side in every dispute. I wondered what had changed since his crimes had been exposed. Schedule it, I decided, at the Portland Art Museum Cafe, neutral ground. The innovation showcase exceeded all expectations. In the large atrium that had once displayed Mark's collection of hunting trophies, employees now presented groundbreaking financial tools designed to expand access, enhance sustainability, and build community wealth. Melissa Jenkins' presentation drew particular attention. Her platform enabled community-based lending through a trust algorithm that considered factors beyond traditional credit scores, a direct challenge to the exclusionary practices Mark had championed. We project this will enable 10,000 new small businesses to access capital in previously redlined neighborhoods, Melissa explained to an enthusiastic audience. The pilot in Northeast Portland showed a 96% repayment rate, better than traditional corporate loans. I watched from the back of the room, feeling a profound satisfaction. Melissa had been on the verge of leaving finance altogether after Mark had repeatedly blocked her promotions. Now she stood confidently presenting an innovation that would help thousands of entrepreneurs like my grandmother, people with brilliant ideas but limited access to traditional financial networks. The investment committee from First National arrived early, Jennifer whispered, appearing at my side. They're particularly interested in Melissa's platform for their rural branches. By late afternoon, 6 major regional banks had expressed interest in licensing our inclusive lending algorithms. The ripple effects of our transformation were spreading across the industry, challenging long-held assumptions about risk and worthiness. The final preparations for tomorrow's sentencing are complete, Jennifer reported as we walked back to my office. Security has reviewed all protocols. The federal marshals will provide additional support given the high-profile nature of the case. I paused at the window, looking out at the river flowing through downtown Portland. It's not about tomorrow, I said quietly. It's about what comes after. Mark was just one symptom of a deeper disease in the financial world. Jennifer nodded, her expression thoughtful. She had been with me since the beginning, first as my assistant at Evergreen Sustainable Solutions, then as my chief strategist in the shadow campaign to acquire Northwest Financial. She understood better than anyone that my motivation had evolved beyond personal vindication. "The implementation team for the Wilson protocols called," she said after a moment. "The first independent audit shows a 43% reduction in discrimination claims at participating institutions. They're calling it the most significant cultural shift in finance since the 2008 regulations." The genuine change happening across the RAO industry was the true victory, far more satisfying than watching Mark's public humiliation. We were rewriting the rules of a system that had been designed to exclude people like my grandmother, whose brilliant financial innovations had been dismissed because she was a woman from a working-class background. "The sentencing will generate headlines," Jennifer acknowledged, "but the real story is happening in places like this." She gestured toward the atrium, where employees were still gathered around Melissa's presentation, enthusiastically discussing implementation possibilities. "Schedule a leadership retreat for next month," I decided. "Invite the heads of all our partner organizations. It's time to formalize the Coalition for Sustainable Finance." The coalition had begun informally, a network of like-minded leaders committed to transforming the industry from within. Many were former victims of Mark's predatory practices, now rebuilding their innovations with proper support and recognition. "Pacific Trust's CEO already confirmed," Jennifer noted, as did the leadership teams from Community Capital Green, Future Investment, and Urban Development Fund. They're calling it the Portland Compact. The name was fitting for a movement that had begun in this rainy Northwest city, but was rapidly spreading across the country. What Mark had dismissed as my cute little eco-hobby was becoming a revolutionary approach to finance, one that valued sustainability and inclusion alongside traditional metrics like growth and profit. "There's one more item for today," Jennifer said, her tone shifting slightly. "The personal effects from Mark's office, the ones that weren't seized as evidence. His mother has requested them, but legally they belong to the company now. What would you like to do?" I considered the question. Mark had filled his office with ostentatious displays of wealth and power, from hunting trophies to expensive art he knew nothing about. None of it reflected genuine passion or personal meaning. Donate the art to public schools, I decided. Return family photos to his mother. Anything with potential historical value can go to the Financial Museum's exhibition on corporate ethics. The museum had reached out weeks ago, requesting materials for an educational exhibit on predatory practices in the industry. Mark's detailed Predator's Playbook, his systematic approach to identifying and destroying vulnerable companies, had become a cautionary tale for business ethics classes across the country. "There's one personal item you might want to see," Jennifer said hesitantly, placing a small leather-bound book on my desk. It was hidden in a false bottom in his desk drawer. The FBI cleared it for release yesterday. The book was worn, its pages filled with handwritten notes in my grandmother's distinctive script. I recognized it immediately. Her original financial journal, containing the innovative community banking concepts that had made her first company successful. The journal that had mysteriously disappeared shortly before Mark orchestrated the hostile takeover that destroyed her life's work. "He kept it," I whispered, running my fingers over my grandmother's careful notations. "All these years, he kept the evidence of what he stole from her." Jennifer nodded grimly. "The FBI believes he kept trophies from all his major takeovers. This one was special. He had it in his personal space, not in the storage unit with the others." The discovery sent a wave of complex emotions through me. Anger at the confirmation of what I had long suspected, that Mark had deliberately targeted my grandmother's company. Sadness that she hadn't lived to see her innovations vindicated, and a strange sense of closure, holding tangible proof of the theft that had set me on this path of retribution. Add it to the museum exhibition, I decided after a moment. But have it digitized first. Her ideas deserve to be preserved and credited properly. The morning of Mark's sentencing dawned gray and rainy, typical Portland weather that seemed fitting for the occasion. I dressed carefully in a forest green suit that had become something of a signature since taking control of Northwest Financial. The color was a deliberate choice, a constant reminder of evergreen sustainable solutions, the company Mark had dismissed as a hobby, but which had ultimately provided the foundation for his downfall. Federal marshals confirmed extra security. "Measures are in place," Jennifer reported, meeting me in the lobby of our building. "Media presence is significant. All major financial networks are covering the sentencing live." We rode in silence to the federal courthouse, the same building where Mark had once triumphantly emerged after winning a predatory lending lawsuit against a community credit union. The wheel of justice had turned full circle. The courtroom was packed with journalists, industry observers, and Mark's former victims. I recognized faces from companies he had destroyed, careers he had derailed, innovations he had stolen. They had come to witness the final chapter in his downfall. Mark entered in handcuffs, escorted by federal marshals. His designer suit had been replaced by standard-issue clothing, his confident swagger reduced to a defeated shuffle. He avoided eye contact with everyone, especially me. The proceedings were brief but powerful. The judge, a woman whose sister had lost her savings in one of Mark's early schemes, delivered a scathing assessment of his crimes. "Mr. Wilson, your actions represent not just violations of securities laws, but a fundamental betrayal of the trust that makes our financial system possible," she stated firmly. "You have treated regulations as inconveniences, other people's livelihoods as collateral damage, and ethical obligations as irrelevant to your pursuit of wealth and power." The sentencing recommendations were accepted in full. 17 years in federal prison, lifetime bans from the financial industry, complete asset forfeiture, and restitution to identified victims. The punishment was unprecedented for white-collar crime. A clear message that the era of gentle wrist slaps for financial predators was ending. As the marshals led Mark away, he finally looked in my direction. His expression wasn't anger or hatred as I might have expected, but something closer to bewilderment, as if he still couldn't quite comprehend how the wife he had systematically underestimated had engineered his complete destruction. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for comments. Following our agreed strategy, I gave one brief statement to the Financial Times reporter. "Today isn't about the past, it's about the future we're building. Northwest Financial is leading. The transformation toward sustainable, inclusive banking practices that serve communities, not just shareholders. The Wilson protocols provide a roadmap for others to follow, ensuring that predatory practices are identified and eliminated before they harm vulnerable entrepreneurs." The reporter pressed for more personal reflections on Mark's downfall, but I redirected consistently to the reforms and innovations now reshaping the industry. The story needed to be bigger than one man's crimes or one woman's revenge. The Portland Art Museum Cafe was quiet when I arrived for my meeting with Margaret Wilson, Mark's mother. She sat primly at a corner table, her designer outfit and perfect coiffure a stark contrast to the distress evident in her expression. "Rachel," she acknowledged as I took a seat across from her. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." I nodded, waiting. Our relationship had always been complicated. She had embraced me initially as the perfect corporate wife for her ambitious son, then grown increasingly distant as I began developing my own business interests. "I want to apologize," she said, finally surprising me with her directness. "Not for Mark. He made his choices and must face the consequences. I'm apologizing for my own role in enabling him." The admission was unexpected. Margaret had always fiercely defended her son, dismissing any criticism as jealousy or misunderstanding. "I raised him to believe he was entitled to success," she continued, her voice steady despite the pain evident in her eyes. "I celebrated his achievements without questioning his methods. I chose not to see the warning signs. I thought of my own grandmother, whose financial innovations Margaret's son had stolen. The contrast between these two matriarchs couldn't have been more striking. One who taught her granddaughter to value integrity and innovation, the other who fostered entitlement and exploitation in her son. "The foundation called me," Margaret said after a moment. "They're naming one of the grant programs after your grandmother. Eleanor Wilson was a remarkable woman. I wish I had known her work before." She trailed off, unable to complete the thought. "Before Mark destroyed her company?" I supplied, keeping my tone neutral. Margaret nodded, looking down at her untouched tea. "I found his trophy collection," she admitted quietly. "After the FBI finished with the storage unit, I saw the files, dozens of companies, hundreds of lives impacted. I had no idea of the scale." Her distress appeared genuine, and I felt a surprising flicker of empathy. Margaret had been raised in the same patriarchal financial world that had shaped her son, taught to believe that ruthless competition was not just acceptable, but admirable when practiced by men of ambition. "What will you do now?" I asked. "Sell the house in Lake Oswego," she replied without hesitation. "Donate most of the proceeds to the restitution fund. Move to my sister's place in Arizona." She paused, then added with unexpected firmness, "And provide testimony for the congressional investigation. I have records going back decades, patterns that implicate others beyond Mark." Her offer caught me off guard. Margaret Wilson, the consummate financial society wife, volunteering to help dismantle the very system that had elevated her family to prominence. "They approached me after the sentencing," she explained, noting my surprise. "I realized I have a choice: to be remembered as merely the mother of a convicted financial criminal, or as someone who helped change the industry for the better." As we parted ways, Margaret handed me a small package wrapped in tissue paper. "This belonged to Mark's grandfather," she said. "Given what I now know about your grandmother's company, I believe it should be returned to you." Later, in the privacy of my office, I unwrapped the package to find a small brass compass in a wooden case. The engraving on the back read, "Wilson Community Banking, where your money stays in your community," with a date from the 1940s. Jennifer's research confirmed what I immediately suspected. Wilson Community Banking had been my grandmother's first major client when she developed her innovative local lending model. Mark's grandfather had recognized her genius and supported her work, a fact his grandson had either never known or deliberately obscured. The compass found a place on my desk, a reminder that the legacy of both our families contained more nuance than I had recognized, and that redemption was possible even after grievous harm. The following weeks brought a whirlwind of activity as the Wilson protocols moved from voluntary adoption to regulatory consideration. The Congressional Committee's preliminary report, heavily featuring evidence from Mark's case, had sparked demands for systemic reform across the financial industry. The Securities and Exchange Commission requested our implementation guidelines. Jennifer reported during our morning briefing. They're considering incorporating key elements into their new regulatory framework for sustainable finance. What had begun as internal company reforms had grown into an industry-wide movement. Financial institutions were scrambling to demonstrate their commitment to transparency and ethical practices, fearful of becoming the next Northwest financial cautionary tale. Pacific Trust integration has entered Phase 3, Jennifer continued. Their community banking algorithms paired with our institutional resources created a hybrid model that's outperforming both traditional and purely sustainable approaches. The merger that Mark had planned as a conquest had become instead a model of collaborative innovation. Rather than dismantling Pacific Trust's unique approach, we had created a genuine partnership that preserved and amplified their sustainable vision. The Employee Innovation Program has generated 17 patent applications this quarter, Jennifer noted with satisfaction. Most from team members who were previously sidelined under Mark's leadership. The creative energy unleashed by removing The toxic hierarchy was perhaps the most satisfying aspect of the transformation. Ideas that had been suppressed for years were now flourishing, driving both financial performance and positive social impact. And the Eleanor Wilson Scholarship. Recipients have been selected, Jennifer concluded. 27 women from underrepresented backgrounds will receive full funding for financial leadership training, with guaranteed internships across our partner network. The scholarship program, funded entirely from Mark's forfeited assets, represented the perfect symmetry of justice. His ill-gotten gains now supporting the very people his predatory practices had harmed. My grandmother would have appreciated the poetic rightness of this outcome. My phone buzzed with a message from Melissa Jenkins. Her community lending platform had just secured its first major institutional partner, a national bank looking to rebuild trust in neighborhoods previously targeted by predatory lending practices. The Portland Compact working groups are finalized, Jennifer reported. Leaders from 32 financial institutions will convene next month to formalize the sustainable banking standards. They're requesting you deliver the keynote address. The compact had evolved from informal conversations into a structured coalition committed to transforming financial practices nationwide. Many participants were former competitors who now recognized that collaboration on ethical standards benefited the entire industry. Congressional representatives from 3 committees confirmed attendance, Jennifer added. They're viewing this as a potential model for regulatory reform, industry-led standards with government enforcement mechanisms. This marriage of private initiative and public accountability represented the most promising path forward, combining the innovation of the market with the protection of democratic oversight. Mark's approach of viewing regulations as obstacles to be circumvented had been replaced by recognition that proper guardrails create a healthier system for everyone. The museum exhibition opens tomorrow, Jennifer reminded me. They've requested your presence at the ribbon-cutting ceremony. The Financial Ethics Museum had created a comprehensive exhibit documenting Mark's predatory tactics alongside contrasting examples of ethical leadership. My grandmother's journal occupied a central place, her innovative approach to community banking presented as a road not taken, until now. Schedule it, I confirmed, and arrange for buses to bring students from local business schools. History needs to shape the next generation of financial leaders. Later that afternoon, I walked through the transformed offices of Northwest Financial, now officially renamed Evergreen Financial Partners. The physical changes reflected the deeper transformation: open collaborative spaces instead of hierarchical, offices, living plants bringing nature into the financial environment, and mission statements emphasizing community benefit alongside shareholder returns. In the main atrium, the employee recognition wall displayed photographs and stories of team members whose innovations were reshaping the company. Many were people who had been invisible under Mark's leadership, their talents dismissed because of gender, race, or failure to conform to his narrow vision of success. A notification on my phone indicated that the Wilson Protocols had just been adopted by the nation's 6th largest bank, another domino falling in the transformation of the industry. What had begun as my personal revenge against a dismissive husband had evolved into a movement with the potential to reshape finance itself. The true victory wasn't Mark's downfall, or even my triumph in acquiring his company. It was the systemic change now rippling through an industry long overdue for transformation. The husband who had mocked my small business hadn't just lost his company. He had inadvertently catalyzed a revolution that would outlast both of us. 6 months after Mark's sentencing, I stood at the podium of the National Financial Reform Conference, an event that hadn't existed before his downfall exposed the depth of predatory practices in the industry. The audience included regulators, industry leaders, educators, and advocates, all focused on building a more sustainable and inclusive financial system. The journey that brought me here began with underestimation, I told them, deliberately. avoiding direct references to Mark. When we're underestimated, we have two choices: to accept the limitations others place upon us, or to use their blindness as our greatest advantage. The crowd nodded in recognition. Many had their own stories of being dismissed, sidelined, or excluded from the financial world because they didn't fit the traditional profile of success. Transformation requires more than replacing individuals. It demands reimagining systems. I continued. The Wilson Protocols offer a framework not just for identifying predatory practices, but for creating institutional cultures where such behaviors cannot take root. On screens around the hall, data demonstrated the impact of these changes: improved performance metrics across adopting institutions, increased diversity in leadership, expanded access to capital for previously excluded entrepreneurs, and growing market share for sustainable financial products. We stand at an inflection point, I concluded. We can continue the work of building financial systems that serve communities rather than exploit them. Systems that value innovation from all sources, not just privileged networks. Systems that measure success not just by profit, but by positive impact on people and the planet. The standing ovation that followed wasn't for me personally, but for the vision of what finance could become. The husband who had mocked my small business was now serving his sentence, largely forgotten as the industry moved forward without him. His name remained attached to the protocols designed to prevent others from following his predatory path. A fitting legacy for a man who had believed himself above accountability. Back in Portland the following week, I visited the community center where Evergreen Financial Partners had established its first neighborhood banking hub. The facility, located in a previously underserved area, combined financial services with education, small business support, and community gathering spaces. Melissa Jenkins greeted me at the entrance, proudly showcasing the impacts of her lending platform. 37 new businesses launched in the first quarter, she reported, 92% still operating successfully. The community wealth circulating locally has increased by 23%. These metrics, measuring genuine economic empowerment rather than extractive profits, represented the future of finance we were building. Not coincidentally, they were precisely the kind of measures Mark had dismissed as irrelevant to serious banking. In the center's main hall, entrepreneurs gathered for workshops on sustainable business practices. Many were people who would have been automatically rejected under traditional banking models, their potential dismissed because they lacked conventional credentials or connections. We're expanding to 3 more neighborhoods next month, Melissa explained as we toured the facility. The waiting list for the incubator program has over 200 applicants. The demand underscored what I had argued for years, that traditional finance was failing to serve vast segments of potential innovation. Mark's approach of focusing exclusively on established players had not only been harmful to excluded communities, but had missed enormous market opportunities. The Wilson Protocols audit team submitted their quarterly report, Jennifer informed me when I returned to headquarters. Financial institutions that have fully implemented the standards are showing an average 18% improvement in employee retention and a 23% increase in innovation metrics. The data confirmed what I had long believed, that ethical, inclusive practices weren't just morally right, but competitively advantageous. The financial ecosystem was healthier without predators like Mark systematically destroying promising innovations from outsiders. The Congressional Committee wants to name the new regulatory framework after you, Jennifer added. The Rachel Wilson Financial Inclusion Standards. They're scheduling the announcement for next month. I shook my head immediately. Suggest they name it after my grandmother instead. The Eleanor Wilson Community Banking Standards. She deserves the recognition. I'm just implementing what she envisioned decades ago. Jennifer nodded in understanding. While the media still occasionally framed the story as a wife's revenge against a dismissive husband, the truth was both simpler and more profound. I hadn't set out primarily to destroy Mark, but to build something he was incapable of imagining. A financial system that valued sustainability, inclusion, and community benefit alongside traditional metrics of success. As sunset painted Portland's skyline in shades of gold and pink, I stood at my office window reflecting on the journey. The small sustainable products company Mark had mockingly called my cute hobby had provided the foundation for acquiring his financial empire. But the true victory wasn't taking his company. It was transforming it into something genuinely beneficial to society. The husband who mocked my small business hadn't just lost his company and freedom. He had inadvertently catalyzed a reimagining of what finance could be. And that transformation would be his most enduring legacy. A legacy he never intended but helped create through his own arrogance and failure of vision. In the end, the best revenge wasn't just buying his company and firing him publicly. It was building something better in its place. Something that would continue growing and evolving long after both our names were forgotten. A year had passed since Mark's sentencing. The financial world had moved on, finding new stories to captivate its attention, but the structural changes catalyzed by his downfall continued to reshape the industry. The Wilson Protocols had been formally adopted by regulatory bodies across 3 countries, their principles incorporated into banking oversight frameworks and business school curricula alike. I stood at the podium of the Global Sustainable Finance Summit, surveying an audience that would have been unimaginable just 18 months earlier. Central bank governors sat alongside community credit union leaders. Wall Street veterans exchanged ideas with fintech innovators from underserved communities. The artificial boundaries that had long fragmented the financial world were dissolving, replaced by a shared commitment to rebuilding the system on more sustainable foundations. The transformation we've witnessed wasn't the work of any single person or institution, I told them, deliberately avoiding centering my own story in the narrative. It was the collective realization that our financial systems had been designed to benefit too few at the expense of too many, and that this imbalance ultimately undermined the health of the entire ecosystem. On screens throughout the conference hall, data visualizations illustrated the impacts of implementing the Wilson Protocols. Increased lending to previously excluded communities, improved employee retention and satisfaction at participating institutions, enhanced long-term performance metrics, and accelerated innovation pipelines across the industry. When we expand who can participate in financial systems, we expand what those systems can achieve, I continued. The talent and innovation that had been systematically excluded represented not just a moral failing, but a massive market inefficiency. This perspective, that inclusion was economically advantageous, not merely socially desirable, had proven particularly effective in converting traditional financial institutions to the new paradigm. Even those unmoved by ethical arguments could not ignore the competitive advantages demonstrated by early adopters of the reformed practices. After my keynote, I met with a delegation of financial regulators from emerging markets, eager to implement versions of the Wilson Protocols tailored to their specific contexts. What had begun as internal company reforms at Northwest Financial had evolved into a global template for transforming financial systems from within. The Eleanor Wilson Community Banking Initiative exceeded all first-year targets, Jennifer reported during our debrief session that evening. 17,000 new small businesses funded, 92% successful after 12 months, and $2 billion in wealth retained in previously disinvested communities. The initiative, named for my grandmother whose financial innovations had been suppressed decades earlier, represented the perfect symmetry of justice. It implemented her visionary approach to community-centered banking at a scale she could never have achieved in her lifetime, funded by assets recovered from the man who had helped destroy her original company. The regulatory framework based on our model passed the final committee vote, Jennifer continued, scanning updates on her tablet. Implementation begins next quarter for all institutions over $50 billion in assets. They've kept the Eleanor Wilson name for the community banking standards. The recognition of my grandmother's contributions brought a deeper satisfaction than any personal accolade could have provided. Her ideas, once dismissed as too idealistic for serious finance, were now being enshrined in regulatory frameworks that would shape the industry for generations to come. Pacific Trust sent over their quarterly integration report. Jennifer added, "The combined sustainable investment technologies have been licensed to 23 major institutions globally. Revenue is 41% above projections. The merger that Mark had intended as a hostile takeover had instead become a case study in collaborative innovation. Rather than absorbing and neutralizing Pacific Trust's pioneering approaches, we had created genuine partnership that amplified their impact while preserving their distinctive culture. The Employee Innovation Program results are particularly impressive," Jennifer noted with satisfaction. 87 new financial products launched, 62 patent applications filed, and a 340% increase in client adoption of sustainable investment options. This unleashing of creative potential represented perhaps the most profound transformation of the company. Under Mark's leadership, innovation had been tightly controlled and deliberately constrained, limited to incremental improvements that wouldn't threaten existing power structures. Now ideas flowed freely across departments, hierarchies had flattened, and previously silenced voices drove much of our most successful development. Melissa Jenkins called from the community center, Jennifer reported. The neighborhood banking hub model has been replicated in 27 cities nationwide. They're requesting additional support to meet demand for the Entrepreneur Mentorship Program. The neighborhood hubs, combining financial services with education and community supports, embodied our reimagined approach to banking. Located in areas traditionally underserved by mainstream finance, they created accessible entry points for people previously excluded from economic opportunity and had proven remarkably successful by traditional metrics as well. "Schedule a strategy session with Melissa's team," I directed. "Let's identify what resources they need to scale effectively while maintaining quality." My phone buzzed with a notification. The Federal Reserve had just released a research paper validating our community banking metrics as more predictive of long-term market stability than traditional risk assessment models. Another institutional confirmation that what Mark had dismissed as naive idealism actually represented sounder financial practice. The museum sent over visitor statistics for the financial ethics exhibition, Jennifer continued. Over 40,000 people have toured it since opening, including delegations from 92 business schools. They're developing an educational curriculum based on the case studies. The Financial Ethics Museum exhibition, documenting Mark's predatory tactics alongside contrasting examples of ethical leadership, had evolved from a cautionary tale into a teaching tool. Business students now analyzed his downfall alongside other historic market failures, extracting lessons about the ultimate unsustainability of exploitative practices. "There's a personal update from the prison system," Jennifer added, her tone shifting slightly. "Mark has requested permission to participate in the inmate financial literacy program. Apparently, he wants to teach basic investment concepts to other prisoners preparing for release." The request surprised me. Throughout his trial and sentencing, Mark had maintained his innocence, portraying himself as the victim of overzealous prosecution and personal vendetta. This first sign of genuine rehabilitation, wanting to use his knowledge to help others, suggested a level of reflection I hadn't expected from him. "Support the request," I decided after a moment's consideration. "With appropriate oversight, of course." Jennifer raised an eyebrow. "You're not concerned about him using it for self-promotion or manipulation?" I shook my head. The system has sufficient safeguards now, and if he's genuinely trying to contribute positively, even in a small way, that should be encouraged. My response reflected how far I had traveled from the raw anger that initially fueled my campaign against Mark. The goal had never been his destruction for its own sake, but the transformation of the systems that had enabled his predatory behaviors. With those reforms well underway, I could afford a more nuanced perspective on his individual journey. The following morning brought a visit from an unexpected guest, Margaret Wilson, Mark's mother, who had largely disappeared from public view since her son's sentencing. "The changes you've implemented are remarkable," she observed as we toured the transformed headquarters of what was now officially Evergreen Financial Partners. "I hardly recognize the place, and I mean that as the highest compliment." Margaret had undergone her own transformation in the wake of her son's downfall. After initially retreating to her sister's home in Arizona, she had re-emerged as an unlikely advocate for financial reform, providing testimony to congressional committees and speaking candidly about the culture of entitlement she had helped instill in her son. "I've been working with a women's financial literacy program in Phoenix," she told me as we settled in my office, "helping women from backgrounds similar to mine understand how the financial system works and how to ensure their daughters don't repeat my mistakes." Her initiative represented another unexpected positive outcome from the whole ordeal, a prominent society matron using her insider knowledge to empower women who had been systematically excluded from financial education. Mark's crimes had inadvertently created ripples of positive change, extending far beyond the immediate business context. "I visited Mark last month," Margaret continued, her expression complicated. "He's different, more reflective, less certain of his own righteousness. The financial literacy program has given him purpose, though of course it's a very small restitution for the harm he caused." I nodded, maintaining a neutral expression. My relationship with Mark was now purely historical, a closed chapter, rather than an ongoing emotional entanglement. His personal journey toward potential redemption was his own to navigate, significant to his mother, but peripheral to the larger transformation his downfall had catalyzed. The Eleanor Wilson Scholarship program selected its second cohort, Jennifer announced when she joined us. 43 women from non-traditional backgrounds will receive full support for financial leadership training, with guaranteed internships across our partner network. Margaret smiled at this news. Eleanor was brilliant, wasn't she? I've been studying her original community banking models as part of our women's financial history curriculum. So many innovations that were ahead of their time. This acknowledgement of my grandmother's contributions from the mother of the man who had helped suppress them represented another form of closure. Not erasing the past harm, but validating the lasting value of what had nearly been lost. After Margaret departed, I spent the afternoon reviewing applications for the Green Future Innovation Fund. The billion-dollar initiative, created to support entrepreneurs from backgrounds traditionally excluded from venture capital, had received over 2,000 submissions in its second funding round, each representing innovations that might have been suppressed or stolen in the previous era. The selection committee has identified 87 finalists, Jennifer reported. They're particularly excited about this cluster of community banking technologies, designed by a team from formerly Redline neighborhoods in Chicago. The fund had already demonstrated remarkable success, with its first cohort of supported entrepreneurs generating both strong financial returns and significant positive social impacts. What market fundamentalists like Mark had failed to understand was that exclusion wasn't just unfair, it was inefficient, leaving vast reservoirs of talent and innovation untapped. "Schedule site visits for the top 20 projects," I instructed. "I want to meet these entrepreneurs personally before making final funding decisions." My calendar notification reminded me of tomorrow's meeting with the Eleanor Wilson Foundation Board, the organization established to carry forward my grandmother's vision of financial systems that serve communities rather than extract from them. Funded primarily by assets recovered from Mark's financial empire, the foundation had become a powerful force for implementing the reformed practices now spreading throughout the industry. The Portland Compact implementation team submitted their annual report, Jennifer noted, referring to the coalition of financial institutions committed to sustainable banking standards. Membership has expanded to 127 institutions representing 68% of market share. The Wilson protocols have been fully implemented by 94 of them. This steady growth of the movement, from internal company reforms to industry-wide standards to global regulatory frameworks, represented the true measure of success. Mark's downfall had been merely the catalyst. The enduring impact lay in the transformed systems that would prevent others from replicating his predatory approach. "I've been thinking about expansion," I told Jennifer. "Not just geographic growth, but conceptual evolution. The Wilson protocols have addressed many structural issues in traditional finance, but what about the emerging sectors? Cryptocurrency, algorithmic lending, artificial intelligence and risk assessment." Jennifer nodded thoughtfully. The same patterns of exclusion and exploitation could easily be replicated in new technological contexts if we're not proactive. "Exactly. Schedule a think tank session with our innovation team and representatives. From the tech sector, let's develop Wilson Protocols 2.0 for the next generation of financial technologies." This forward-looking approach reflected how thoroughly I had moved beyond the personal vendetta that initially motivated my campaign against Mark. What had begun as revenge had evolved into a mission to transform the financial ecosystem itself, work that would continue long after the specific events that catalyzed it had faded from public memory. Later that week, I visited the community center where Melissa Jenkins' neighborhood banking hub had first launched. The facility had expanded beyond financial services to include a business incubator, coding academy, and childcare center, creating a comprehensive support system for entrepreneurs from backgrounds traditionally excluded from economic opportunity. "We've helped launch 243 new businesses in this neighborhood alone," Melissa reported proudly as we toured the bustling space. "Retention rate at 36 months is 82%. Far above national averages for small business survival." The entrepreneurs working in the center's collaborative spaces represented precisely the kind of talent and innovation that traditional financial systems had systematically overlooked. People with brilliant ideas but without the family connections, elite credentials, or conformity to conventional expectations that gatekeepers like Mark had demanded. "The lending algorithms you developed have been revolutionary," I told Melissa. "Traditional banks are scrambling to understand why your default rates are so much lower than theirs, despite serving populations they consider high risk." Melissa smiled knowingly. "Because we're measuring the right things. Traditional models miss critical factors that actually predict success. Plus, our support systems prevent many of the common failure points for new businesses." Her approach embodied the fundamental insight that had driven our transformation, that the problem wasn't with the entrepreneurs who had been excluded, but with the narrow, biased systems that had failed to recognize their potential. By redesigning those systems with inclusion as a core principle, we had unlocked vast reservoirs of previously suppressed innovation. The Wilson Protocol's educational curriculum has been adopted by 29 business schools, Jennifer reported, during our evening debrief. They're using the case study of Northwest Financial's transformation as a core teaching tool for ethical leadership and sustainable business practices. This academic institutionalization ensured that the lessons from our experience would shape the next generation of financial leaders, creating structural barriers against the emergence of future predators like Mark while establishing new frameworks for measuring success beyond short-term profit extraction. "The congressional hearing on financial inclusion standards is scheduled for next month," Jennifer continued. "They've requested your testimony alongside representatives from the Federal Reserve and the Treasury Department." The hearing represented another milestone in the journey from company-level reforms to systemic transformation. What had begun as my personal campaign against a dismissive husband had evolved into a movement reshaping regulatory frameworks across the financial landscape. "The museum exhibition has been invited to tour internationally," Jennifer added. "Financial regulators in Europe, Asia, and South America want to use it as an educational tool for both industry professionals and the general public." The exhibition, documenting Mark's predatory tactics alongside contrasting examples of ethical leadership had become a powerful vehicle for changing cultural norms around finance, making visible the previously hidden mechanisms of exploitation, while highlighting alternative approaches that created broader prosperity. One last update, Jennifer concluded. Mark's request to expand the prison financial literacy program was approved. They're allowing him to develop a curriculum for teaching sustainable investment concepts to inmates preparing for release. This small sign of potential rehabilitation reminded me that even Mark, the embodiment of toxic financial leadership, contained the capacity for growth and change. The systems he had exploited had been transformed, preventing others from following. His predatory path, but individual redemption remained possible even for those who had caused significant harm. As the sun set over Portland, I stood at the window of my office, the same view that Mark had once surveyed with arrogant possessiveness, never suspecting that his dismissive underestimation of his wife would ultimately lead to his complete downfall. But the vista looked entirely different now, both literally and metaphorically. Where Mark had seen merely buildings representing financial power to be seized and consolidated, I saw communities being revitalized through more equitable access to capital. Where he had perceived competitors to be crushed, I recognized potential, partners in building more sustainable systems. Where he had identified vulnerable companies as targets for predatory acquisition, I saw innovators deserving support and amplification. The difference wasn't just in our individual perspectives, but in the transformed financial ecosystem now taking shape across the landscape. The husband who had mocked my small sustainable business hadn't just lost his company and freedom. He had inadvertently catalyzed a reimagining of what finance could be. His downfall had created space for the emergence of new models, new metrics, and new leaders committed to building systems that generated prosperity for many rather than extracted wealth for few. 2 years to the day after I had revealed myself as the new owner of Northwest Financial and publicly fired Mark, I stood in the main atrium of Evergreen Financial Partners, hosting a celebration of the Wilson Protocol's global adoption. The event brought together an unlikely coalition of allies, community activists and central bankers, tech innovators and regulatory experts, business school professors and neighborhood entrepreneurs, all united by commitment to transforming financial systems from within. We gather not to commemorate the end of one man's career, I told them, but to celebrate the beginning of a new era in finance, one where success is measured not just by profit extracted, but by prosperity created. Not by wealth concentrated, but by opportunity expanded. Not by innovations suppressed, but by potential unleashed. The metrics displayed on screens throughout the atrium told the story in data: increased lending to previously excluded communities, improved employee retention and satisfaction at participating institutions, enhanced long-term performance indicators, accelerated innovation pipelines across the industry. What Mark and others had dismissed as idealistic hobby thinking had proven not just morally superior, but competitively advantageous. The work continues, I acknowledged, as I concluded my remarks. Systems built over centuries cannot be completely transformed in a matter of years. But we have demonstrated conclusively that more inclusive, more sustainable approaches to finance are not just possible, but profitable. Not just ethically necessary, but economically advantageous. As the attendees mingled and networked, I stepped away for a moment of quiet reflection. The journey from underestimated wife to architect of industry-wide transformation had been neither linear nor simple. What began as personal vindication against a dismissive husband had evolved into something far more significant: a movement to reimagine the fundamental purpose and practices of finance itself. Jennifer approached with a tablet displaying breaking news. The Federal Reserve had just announced formal adoption of the Eleanor Wilson standards for community banking, incorporating them into regulatory frameworks that would shape the industry for decades to come. My grandmother's innovations, once dismissed and suppressed, would now form the foundation for a more inclusive financial future. "Your grandmother would be proud," Jennifer said quietly. "Not just of the recognition of her work, but of how you've expanded and implemented her vision at a scale she could never have achieved." I nodded, thinking of the small brass compass that still sat on my desk, the one that had belonged to Mark's grandfather, returned to me by his mother after his downfall. That symbolic connection between our family's histories reminded me that transformation is never simple or absolute, that even within systems designed for exploitation, individuals can make different choices, can recognize and support innovation rather than suppress it. "We've received another letter from Mark," Jennifer added, her tone neutral. "The prison financial literacy program has expanded to 3 additional facilities. Apparently, his sustainable investment curriculum has been particularly effective, with young inmates preparing for release." This small sign of potential rehabilitation neither diminished the harm Mark had caused nor negated the necessity of the systemic changes his downfall had catalyzed. But it did suggest that transformative justice could work at both individual and structural levels, that even those who had perpetuated harmful systems could potentially contribute to building better alternatives. As the celebration continued, around us, I caught sight of Melissa Jenkins demonstrating her community banking platform to a group of international regulators. The innovation that Mark had dismissed and suppressed was now being recognized as a model for financial inclusion worldwide. Nearby, members of the first Eleanor Wilson Scholarship Cohort discussed their experiences implementing sustainable practices at major institutions where they now held leadership positions. These ripple effects, extending far beyond the immediate context of one company or one industry, represented the true measure of success. The husband who mocked my small business hadn't just lost his company and freedom. His dismissive underestimation had inadvertently created space for the emergence of new models, new metrics, and new leaders committed to building financial systems that worked for the many rather than the few. The small sustainable products company he had mockingly called my cute hobby had provided the foundation for acquiring his financial empire. But the true victory wasn't taking his company. It was transforming it into something genuinely beneficial to society, and then using that transformation as a template for changing the industry itself. In the end, the best revenge wasn't just buying his company and firing him publicly. It was building something better in its place. Something that would continue growing and evolving long after both our names were forgotten. The systems he had exploited had been reformed to prevent others from following his predatory path. The innovations he had suppressed were now flourishing in the light. The people he had dismissed were now leading the transformation. And perhaps most satisfyingly, the wife he had consistently underestimated had not only orchestrated his downfall, but had used that catalyst to initiate changes that would reshape the financial landscape for generations to come. As I rejoined the celebration, I carried this understanding with me, that true justice isn't found in personal vindication alone, but in the lasting transformation of systems that had enabled harm in the first place. The husband who mocked my small business was now merely a footnote in a much larger story of financial reformation. His dismissive underestimation had backfired in the most complete way possible, becoming the catalyst for precisely the kind of systemic change he had spent his career preventing. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.